Hello and welcome to
Good.
today's webinar brought to you by SA Partners. The purpose of today is to share SA Partners' thought leadership in the area of lean and green. My name is Jo and I will be the facilitator for this 1-hour event. Before we begin, I would like to quickly explain the format. Shortly, I will hand over to the presenter, Keivan Sakai. During Keivan's presentation, we will be running a couple of polls and presenting the results live at the end of the presentation. We'll also have a Q&A session and then wrap up. We are keen to address any questions you may have, so we invite you to submit them by simply typing your question into the question field of the control panel and hit send. So let's begin. I will now hand over to Keivan, who will introduce himself and take us through the webinar.
Good morning, everyone. Well, good afternoon in Australia. Good morning if you're in the UK. My name is Keivan Sakai. Thank you for that introduction, Jo. And thank you for setting up this webinar this morning. So it's my pleasure to talk to you. Well, preferably we would have liked to be in the same room, but I think we are avoiding some emissions by not doing so and talking to each other via this web tool. Now, I am a principal consultant at SA Partners. My area of interest for the past 10-12 years has been lean and green. I have been working in this area with many different size organizations around the globe, from very small companies to very big companies. And more recently, I've had the pleasure of publishing my latest book on the subject. Okay, so without any further ado, let's get into the actual presentation. The objectives of the webinar today is to look into what is real lean and why lean is actually green and why are the same concept at the very core. Also to understand how leading organizations such as Toyota, in fact, are putting the two together and realizing significant benefits financially for their own companies. I would also like to introduce a systematic approach to creating a lean and green business system. Pretty much like lean, where you can't implement lean. In fact, you need to create lean. With lean and green, you also need to create it. It's not about implementing a tool, a technique, an approach. It's rather about creating a mindset and creating a new organization. So let's look at lean and green at a very high level. What are they at a very high level? Well, if you think about lean, lean is about understanding a customer, focusing on the needs of the consumer, eliminating waste, the famous 8 wastes of lean, Tim Wood, Muda Murimura, and by doing so, you enhance value for the consumer. Green, however, is arguably about focusing on very many different customers, different stakeholders, wider society at large, and eliminating waste, and that's what you can call green. However, of course, the types of waste that we are eliminating in this case are slightly different. You probably all know and are familiar with the 8 wastes of lean. We're talking about economic waste. In fact, when these wastes were stipulated, maybe in the 60s by Taiji Ono, they were revolutionary at the time because they don't directly focus on financials of the organization. They indirectly focus on the financials. So if you think about inventory, reducing it, of course, reduces cost, but that was not that well understood 50 years ago. However, today, of course, these 8 ways are very well established. Now, if we go to the 8 ways of green, as you can see, the 8 ways of green are about focusing on broader types of waste. These wastes were stipulated by myself and Peter Hines maybe around 5 years ago. Today I'm very pleased to see that there are a couple of books published on the same subject, and people are more widely using them, alluding to the 8 waste. They've been also widely popularized by the Environmental Protection Agency in the US. And when you glance over, you quickly see that you have got things such as energy consumption, in fact, excess energy consumption, physical waste, it can be liquid, it can be solid, you've got excess water consumption, emissions, and so on and so forth. In order to create a green organization, of course, we need to focus on these and eliminate them. Pretty much the same way we focus on the 8 ways of lean and we eliminate them. So let's dig deeper into what is lean. Well, traditional lean talks about waste elimination. It talks about capacity creation. Traditional lean talks about taking a production facility or a service organization, focus on the flow of work, and try to eliminate unnecessary motion, unnecessary activities, unnecessary idle time, and so on and so forth. The savings in this world can sometimes be illusory. Imagine a situation where you've gone into the shop floor of your factory, you've worked on 2 separate production lines, and you have eliminated half a person on the paper. You have eliminated half a person on each of those 2 production lines. Of course, you have not, and you will not be able to eliminate a full person from the production line, unless we cut the 2 guys in the half and ask them to work on separate lines. So sometimes the savings can be illusory. Now, lean enterprise as a wider concept talks about not just capacity creation or elimination of waste. Of course, it talks about value enhancement. So if we eliminate half a person on each of the 2 production lines, if we are able to put more work on each of the 2 production lines, the extra work goes directly to the bottom line of the organization. And that's why sometimes people refer the red line as X saving and to the blue line as a 2X saving. So ideally, real lean is not just about waste elimination. In fact, it is a lot better if you focused on filling that excess capacity on value enhancement. And in order to do so, you need to create a different culture. And in order to create a different culture, you need to be doing the right things. So in fact, the red line is about efficiency. Efficiency can be defined as doing things right. The blue line can be defined as effectiveness, and effectiveness can be defined as doing the right things. There are a lot of companies, unfortunately, out there who are only focusing on the red line, and I've seen companies who are doing the wrong things right. That is perfectly possible, even with having a lot of lean tools and techniques. Now, if we extend the same logic to green, you can argue that a lean and green enterprise is about 4x saving. In fact, you may remember this famous book in the 90s called Factor 4 by Amory Lovins, Hunter Lovins. They were arguing that you can have an organization where you're doubling your output while halving your resources, halving your inputs. So that was the famous Factor 4 argument, where you extend the logic of lean into a wider scope. You are actively eliminating the inputs, but at the same time enhancing the outputs. And this is what is the very essence of the lean and green enterprise. And this is the very essence of effectiveness applied to a wider scope as a wider concept. And that is what I regard as a lean and green enterprise. Now, moving on from this argument, you may remember back in the 70s and even in the 60s, a number of great thinkers in the world of quality started to argue that quality is for free. Namely Phil Crosby, who wrote a book with that title, Quality is Free. It was heretical back then. Of course, in the 60s, if somebody argued that quality is free, it was a very heretical thing to say. Companies were spending a lot of money putting quality right. Of course, there was always a quality check department at the end of the line with fairly expensive resources, checking almost every piece of widget, every piece manufactured, rolling off the line to make sure that it is complying to the right requirements. And then when it was not compliant, it needed to go back to be reworked and to be put right. And the cost of quality, therefore, was the cost of those guys who were checking it, plus the cost of reworking it. So if somebody went along and said quality is free, as people like Deming, Juran, and Crosby, amongst many, actually did so, it was heretical. You remember what Crosby said? He famously said the first struggle, and it is never over, is to overcome the conventional wisdom regarding quality. He also added, the problem of quality management is not what people don't know about it. The problem, rather, is what people think they know about it. Of course, the same can be applied to the world of environment today. The environment is free, but it's not a gift. The same way quality was free, but it was not a gift. Of course, today it is taken for granted that quality is free. In fact, it is a lot cheaper. In fact, there aren't any manufacturing, or for that matter, any other industry, any big organization without a Six Sigma lean or continuous improvement department. They actively build quality into the line and get rid of the quality check and get rid of all the rework. By doing so, rather counterintuitively, we found out that it is a lot cheaper to manufacture things, to offer services, so on and so forth. In the same way, if you go to organizations today and you tell them environment is free, they're not going to believe you. Guess what? There are very expensive people sitting at the end of the line, making sure that products comply with the environment, that the process complies with the environment. Very rarely you find these environmental departments are being treated as an opportunity. Often they are treated as a cost. And in fact, the lean and green enterprise is about revisiting that mindset. Now, where we started a number of years ago to try to say environment is free, we said, okay, there were two very important key moments in the history of quality movement that helped us move the whole of the industry into realizing that quality is actually free and it needs to be built into the products and into the processes. And those two key moments were Taguchi's redefinition of cost of quality, where he takes cost of quality away from the cost of reworks and redefines it in terms of being right in the middle of the target and quality loss function, that redefinition. Although that was rather academic, and in fact, what really helped us to realize quality is free was the fact that Japanese went out there and did it, above all Toyota. So what helped us realize that the Japanese are doing it was this famous benchmark study carried out by Jim Womack, Dan Jones, and Daniel Roos. And this was published in a book called The Machine That Changed the World. I'm sure most of you have read it. And just to remind you of what the book was saying, here is a snapshot of the book. It is talking about Toyota versus GM back in the 80s. Back in the day, look at the second row. You can compare the quality defects per car between GM and Toyota in Japan, and you see almost a threefold increase in GM. Of course, since then, GM and Ford have bridged that gap. In fact, if you listened to the news last night, you heard about GM, Ford, and Chrysler all doing really well. Toyota has kept being a very lean company, building quality into its cars. Some argued recently that they might have slipped a bit. Well, they might have, we don't know. But the reality is that this benchmark, which was done in the 80s and published in 1990, if you renewed it today, because they do it every year, it's a company called Harbour Incorporation, and the gap is minuscule. So, what about environment? What if we repeated the same benchmark from an environmental point of view? And that's precisely what we did. We said, let's benchmark Toyota against the rest of the automotive manufacturing world and see if there is a similar gap. In order to do so, well, environmental impacts are rather more convoluted than car quality. You have to differentiate between the impact during the use of the product, during the use of a vehicle, which is about 85% of the impact, versus the impact during manufacturing at the OEM itself, which is, including all the material that goes into the car, is only 15%. So in this case, we focused on the direct impact to begin with, to do a comparable benchmark, comparable to what the machine that changed the world had presented. Well, many thousand hours of research has gone into a book that is only just published called Creating a Lean and Green Business System. It contains this benchmark, and here is the result. In the year 2010, which is the latest year where we could find all the relevant information for, of course, all these companies have 1 year lag in their accounting systems, even for the environmental accounting. And then the publisher, of course, takes a year to publish your book. So you look at Toyota in terms of tons of CO2 per vehicle manufactured. That's the third column from right. And that's probably the best way to look at environmental performance in terms of direct impact on the environment by the OEM companies. You see, surprise, surprise, who comes on top? Toyota. followed closely by GM and a number of other volume car manufacturers. What we did, we included Daimler Mercedes in our benchmark. Of course, they are a premium car manufacturer. They are a different species altogether. However, we thought it might be interesting to include them, not least because they have more expensive type vehicles, and it would be interesting to compare them against Toyota and the rest in terms of tons of CO2 per dollar sold. And that is the second column from right. And if you look at that, you see again, surprisingly, Toyota comes on top as the best. So they are only slightly worse than Daimler Mercedes as a premium, as a very premium car manufacturer. But in terms of the volume car manufacturers, they are still the best. And this picture overall shows you how much effort Toyota is putting into being a green company. In fact, when we did this study, we realized that Toyota must be doing something different, not only in terms of economic leanness, but also in terms of broader sustainability aspects and in terms of lean and greenness. So I went to talk to Toyota. As ever, they are much more collaborative and collegiate than any other company on earth I've ever worked with, if you ask the right question. And I was surprised to see how much they care and how much they put effort into the environment, to the point that across Toyota they have got 5 KPIs, and any project you have, anything you want to do within the company, you have to follow these 5, and they are safety, environment, quality, delivery, and cost, in that order. So you want to introduce a new change, you go through these 5 and make sure that you tick all 5 boxes. You want to have a new expenditure, have a new project, start a new initiative, you have to go through all these 5. And everybody across the whole of Toyota is aware of them and applies them systematically. That shows how much they care about environment. So the only thing that goes above it is safety of associates and safety of customers. Of course, that's first. They told me they even had a long debate about which one's first, the long-term sustainability or the short-term safety, and they realized, well, safety needs to be first. And it's interesting that they are putting environment above the quality. And what is interesting is also that cost comes at the bottom. And who is the lowest cost car manufacturer in the world? So that's rather counterintuitive. By not focusing on cost and by focusing on other things, they turn out to be the cheapest cost. I think this is the point that I would like to hand over to my colleague Joe, who's got a poll.
Okay, thanks, Kayvan.
Yes. Thank you.
So you should see the poll on your screen now. So the question is, do you work for an organisation where the lean department and the green department form the same function? And there's a couple of options there. So if you could just select the option that is most relevant to you. Okay, so we're just waiting for the last few votes to come through. Okay, it looks like everybody has voted. and the results are as follows. So 20% selected that they have environment and CI functions, but they are separate. 40% selected that they have environment and CI functions that are combined. 10% selected that they don't have an environment function, and 10% do not have a CI function, and 20% have neither CI or environment functions. So a bit of a mixed bag there, Keivan.
Thank you, Joe. That is very interesting. So what it is telling us is that only 40%, if I'm not mistaken, of the organizations that are today in the room have combined lean and green together. Possibly the next question could be, how active are these departments in putting lean and green together and putting them into action? How many joint projects do you have? In fact, how much people are taking environmental perspective into account when implementing new projects, so on and so forth. Of course, the economic viewpoint is always taken into account. That goes without saying. What we found again in Toyota was that, of course, there is no Japanese word for lean. Lean is a Western conception. With hindsight, those guys who coined the term, they would have chosen another term, very likely, because lean, of course, focuses on without fat. What it rather means, as we know it today, it is about making muscle. So the focus is not on burning fat, it is on building muscle. Not having fat comes with it, of course, but it's not the point. Now, the same is true that today companies who have gotten lean very well are trying to create muscle. Now, in Japanese, there is no word for lean. In Toyota, they just simply call it Toyota Production System. And if you think about it, in other languages, when you translate lean, for example, into French, you can't say maigre or without fat, because that simply means anorexic, and it has got a horrible meaning. So rather than saying anorexic management or anorexic production, which is the literal translation of lean, of course the French say appropriate, or gestion plus juste, appropriate management. Now, in other languages, such as Mandarin in Chinese, you have got even better translations, which literally mean the same thing: appropriate management that is value adding to the masses or to the people. So the Mandarin translation of lean is being Jingyi, which means the essential core for very many people. In Japanese, when we were searching for a translation for lean, we of course found that there isn't one. However, we found an interesting concept in Toyota and in Japanese manufacturing, widely used, and that is called monozukuri. That is probably just about the only replacement for lean management or lean production. Surprisingly, the literal meaning of monozukuri is sustainable manufacturing. So it means manufacturing in harmony with nature and in harmony with the society. And that just shows the profoundness of the concept of lean and green embedded in some of these companies, and these original lean companies, if you like. So they are one and the same at the very core. Now, moving on, we talked about creating a lean and green business system. And I am rather keen to show some live examples of people who are doing it and reaping the benefits. My message is, don't do lean and green, don't do green for the sake of environment. It's got nothing to do with the planet per se. It is not for the planet. It is for your own company's purse. And when you look at this model, what we're trying to say here is you need to have all different parts of this. You need to have strategy deployment. You need to have very good process management. Of course, leadership and people engagement. And you also need to have supply chain management. We've been working with a number of different companies, but we elected to have 5 major case studies in the book of 5 different organizations, each excelling in one of these 4 areas. Of course, there isn't a single company in the world that has got everything right. In fact, Toyota has been blown out of proportion, if you like. It's been promoted as the holy grail of leanness, green, everything. It cannot be true. It's simply, if there is a holy grail concept, there simply can't be a manifestation of it. As soon as you have a manifestation of a holy grail concept, that holy grail is not a holy grail anymore by default. So we have elected to have different companies who each excel in one area. Today we don't have time to go through everything, of course. So rather than trying to talk about everything, let's focus on just one area, the most immediate one, and probably where you can find most benefits, and that is in the process management area. In this box here, we have put together a lean and green intervention system which is suitable for any type of transactional organization where you have a flow, and a flow of transactions, if you like, primarily in manufacturing. So because this talk was sponsored by AFGC, I'm going to show you a number of food companies, retail and food manufacturing. The intervention, of course, follows a plan, do, check, act. The first company I would like to talk about is a fairly small size food business in the United Kingdom. What they do, they import shrimps and other types of seafood, and they defrost it, and they send it to the major multiple supermarkets in the United Kingdom. They are a company of about $50 million, Aussie dollars or US dollars, just about. When we went in, we did a strategy deployment session with the senior management team, and in fact, environmental improvements were not even on the cards because they're so small they probably can't afford it. However, looking closely into it, the managing director, who is a very switched-on manager, pointed out that he has a feeling that they are paying slightly too much for utilities and waste management. So we created this map, which we call a system boundary map, to quickly have a snapshot of what goes in and what comes out. So if you like, this is a mass balance, energy balance of the site at a high level. The environmentalists are familiar with this for a very long time. And this tool allows you to quickly pinpoint what is happening. Very few companies have ever come across who have anything like this or anything remotely like this. So here it quickly shows you that this company is spending about $1 million, about £600,000 on the utilities, which is quite high for a company of a small size and a small footprint. So the managing director was right. In fact, they had a big impact. And the next step for us was to ask why. In order to do so, we applied another tool called the Green Impact Matrix. So here you've got a snapshot of the hotspots of waste, if you like. Across the top, you have material, the process you've got from input to output. from intake of frozen foods coming from Southeast Asia, frozen seafood, going into a freezer, and then so on and so forth. So it obviously gets defrosted and packaged and distributed and all the rest. And then across the bottom, you've got the different types of waste. In this case, we have elected to have gas, electric, water, effluent, and solid wastes. And when you go through this process, you quickly see that there were machines that had a few red post-its, or in fact, what it means, they are a significant hotspot. So, for example, in the middle, you've got a machine which is called the Carnitech machine. What it does is that it is basically a conveyor belt that goes through an oven and it cooks the seafood. And it consumes on its own 45% of the total gas consumption in the site. So we did a quick exercise here with a team of about 6 or 7 senior managers from the site. So you've got the utility manager, you've got the hygiene manager, technical manager, production, the continuous improvement manager, so on and so forth, all working under the same umbrella. And what they do is that they come together, spend about 2 hours on this without doing a very scientific study to pinpoint whether it is 45% of gas or 44.5%. They rather do a broad brush analysis within 5% error margin, and they came up with this. And the next step from this is to select some of the reds and investigate further. So quickly, you know where your hotspots are. And what we did, we introduced another deeper level of a map where you have got your high-level areas of waste. We introduced an A3 into each one of these areas, or from the 5 selected red hotspots from the previous map. An A3 is a problem-solving technique very well established and known in the lean circles, and it's very widely used by companies such as Toyota. So you can see on this map we've got 5 A3s, and the team members work together on different A3s to realize the benefits and how they can solve the problem. I will show you a template A3 later, but for the sake of time, I'll skip and I'll go directly to some of the benefits they realized. So in this case, from the areas of waste, of cost that they had targeted, they quickly realized about $180,000 cashable savings. So what were they? I'll give you an example. You have got the 4th row from the bottom, which is the biggest saving, is talking about $65,000 saving. You look at that, it talks about reducing the gas consumption. Well, what is interesting is that we went to focus on that Carnitech machine and find out how we can reduce the consumption of gas and a number of other areas. Interestingly, what they found out was that the best way to reduce the consumption of gas is to apply a very important lean technique. It is called turn your boilers off during the night. So this very important technique is surprisingly applicable in a lot of companies where they think they need to run both boilers during the night, such as this company, but in fact what they really needed was maybe only 1 hour overnight. You need to run a very small boiler for some hygiene reasons during the night shift, and you don't need to run your boilers full capacity. It might look like a simple fix and a silly mistake, but in fact it isn't. The reason being, very rarely the utility manager, the hygiene manager, the technical team, and the production manager have the opportunity to come together to investigate things deeply, maybe through an A3 tool, to realize that actually it's only an assumption that the hygiene team needs 6 hours of cleaning. Even if they did, they don't need both big boilers to run to create steam. So in this exercise, within a dozen days, this team from a very small company, they realized $180,000 cashable savings in the bank. That was a small company. The next case study I would like to share with you is from a much larger company. This is a multinational multi-billion-dollar manufacturing from one of the sites in Southeast Asia. We worked with a team of about 22, 23 senior engineers, senior managers, including the site general manager, and they did exactly the same exercise. They looked at what goes in and what comes out, and they did exactly the same exercise in terms of what are the hotspots of the green waste. And within a week, so we started on a Monday with this team on the shop floor, and we finished on Friday afternoon. And by the end of the week, they had saved 16% of the total energy and 15% of the site water. Now, something on the water is that, unfortunately or fortunately, water is much cheaper than energy, which means actually you have got a few opportunities for cashable savings, but sometimes you have got regional targets to reduce it. Therefore, they were keen to do so. This team in Southeast Asia from this multinational company, they were using similar tools and techniques, very simple ones, to realize these benefits. So, for example, in one area we had heated product with machines that are, of course, very hot and producing lots of heat. Adjacent to that, the product needed to be cooled down, and this was a chocolate factory. So adjacent to that, you have a chilled area, and surprisingly, there wasn't a wall between the two areas. Well, again, you might think that's a simple mistake, but in fact, historically, that's how all the sites pertaining to this manufacturer are built around the world, for a simple design mistake, and many other similar issues which the team successfully rectified. Now, for the sake of time, I quickly move to the third example. So in this case, you have got a company where this is allegedly the largest sandwich factory in the world. And you look at the waste on the right in terms of the waste that comes out of the site, and you see the top line is bread. It is about 1,600 tons of waste. And when we did an exercise with this team, the hotspot analysis, the brief to us was not to focus on energy, not to focus on water, simply focus on solid and liquid waste across the site. And of course, this was a sandwich factory, so they didn't have so much liquid waste. They had a lot of solid waste. And the biggest one was bread. What was interesting, what is happening is that every loaf of bread that comes into the site has got two crusts. And the first thing they do is that they take the crust off and they put it in a bin, and it goes into animal consumption. And believe it or not, in the UK, the vast majority of sandwich factories use a foot-long household-size loaf of bread. So we decided to delegate to a team to apply an A3 to the problem. And this is an A3, a schematic of a typical A3. A good A3 is in fact handwritten, and it's very untidy, but the team decided to make it look tidy for the sake of presentation. And when you look at it, you realize that that pie chart tells you the blue bit in the pie chart is the crust. So the biggest problem is the crust. So if I asked you what would you do about this problem, I'm sure you come up with suggestions such as, oh, what about crust sandwiches? Well, in fact, that was one of the countermeasures that the team offered. what about asking the bakers to bake longer loaves? In fact, that was another solution or countermeasure that the team suggested, so on and so forth. But in fact, the team decided to go and visit the bakers to see what they can learn from the process. And what they realized very quickly when we went there, we saw the bakers actually have the capability to cut the crust much thinner, meaning that you can get one more slice at least out of each loaf. Simply by doing so, by switching from where they were to one more slice out of each loaf and cutting the crust much thinner, using the capability that already existed in the baker and applying statistical process control to make sure that the baker can reliably and predictably deliver on this promise, they realized 600 tons worth of waste saving, which is a huge amount. Okay, I can't share with you the financials, but I can simply tell you that the financials are equally huge. Now, one of the points that I would like to make here towards the end, just before I finish, is that companies go through stages of maturity in terms of the perception of lean and green. So many companies begin by thinking there is a conflict between the two. Then they go into a mode where the companies perceive that lean and green are at best benign. They can go in parallel, but they'll be separate. Some companies start realizing synergies as a more mature stage, but in fact, what really should happen is that the two are one and the same. Isn't it the fact that both lean and green departments are about continuous improvement? In which case, shouldn't we have just the same continuous improvement department for both? Apply the same proactive quality mentality to both and use some very basic approaches that I've shown in some case studies just above to realize them. Now, if you were more interested, this book is out now, so you can purchase your copy, order your copy, and look for more case studies. Now, I'm going to finish. I think I've slightly overrun, and I'm going to hand over back to Joe, and I'll be very pleased to answer any questions.
Thank you, Keivan. That's fantastic. So we have a question here from Andrew, who asks, your case studies talk about action learning and the role of people. Is that a significant factor in creating a lean and green business system?
Yes. So, yes, indeed. Thank you for that question. Of course, it is all about people. Bear in mind that people are not the right lever for an intervention. So you don't design your intervention to change people. But of course, it is all about people. Now, what I mean by that is that those savings that I showed you are not savings that I have realized, or even the site senior management alone would have been able to realize. They were entirely down to a bottom-up approach. I say entirely down to a bottom-up approach where a large number of people were involved. I talked about Kaizen workshops or continuous improvement blitz workshops. About, on average, we take about 10 days, sometimes only 5 days, where you have a senior team of various sizes come together and work together. But behind that team, you've got people who report to them, and maybe 2-3 tiers down in the organizational hierarchy from them. It is all about engaging with those guys. And we would have not been able to realize any of these benefits without capturing the ideas that people often have. And frustratingly for them, often they are being ignored. Thank you, Joe. So please do. It's a little bit difficult on a webinar because I can't see if that was the end of the question. So
yeah, no, that so we have another question here. This one's from
sure.
David, who asks, are you seeing some industries embracing this more than others? And what are the lessons for those who aren't on board yet?
Okay, again, a great question. The answer is yes. I would say that consumer goods industry is generally a lot more on board with the sustainability message, simply because you probably have more leaders in this industry realizing the financial benefits. So you look at Unilever and Procter & Gamble, they have very ambitious targets on the environmental front. You look at the retailers such as Walmart and Tesco, they are two of the three biggest retailers on the planet. They have extremely ambitious targets for the environment. In fact, if the Consumer Goods Forum, which was part of the Rio 20 summit, if the targets set by the Consumer Goods Forum are realized, probably we are something like 25% there in terms of meeting the original Kyoto targets. And what I can say is that these companies are paying more than the fair share towards the environmental goals. Well, again, I have to emphasize, don't take me wrong, I'm not saying everything Unilever does is green or everything Tesco and Walmart do are green. But what I am saying is that they are punching above their weight. Okay, the question is why? Why do they bother? And rightly you've asked this question. I don't think it's because they've got any altruistic goals. They are being very selfish. It is all about their own company purse. And, you know, so be it. There is nothing wrong with that. We do observe a governance shift where governments are stepping back, doing less and less about the environment, and companies are doing more and more. And I personally don't have any problem with that. And that is just, you know, reality of the world we live in. Dysfunctional democracies, unfortunately, and I would like to see more companies take responsibility. And the message has landed to some extent in the consumer goods industry, whereas other industries such as service industries still are a little bit behind.
Okay, brilliant. So we've got one more question here from Donna, who asks, what are the 2 or 3 key things you need to develop to complement existing lean capabilities to develop lean and green capabilities?
Okay, again, we've got very good questions today. Thanks for that. I would say if you go back to that creating the lean and green business system, you see that the 4 things we talk about are strategy deployment, process management, leadership, and supply chain management. I would say you need a balance of all 4. And in fact, the one that you often begin with is to have a successful study, a successful story, such as the ones that I just talked about. So these organizations invariably use these blitz improvements in the process area to create an initiative and introduce a movement, a wave of doing lean and green things, simply because they realize they're sitting on a gold mine, which to some extent they were ignoring before these blitz came along. The reality is then you probably need to have a very strong strategy deployment mechanism. We have worked with companies such as Tesco and Marks and Spencer. What one can observe in these companies is that lean and green, plan A, corporate social responsibility, community, whatever you want to call it, it will only materialize if it's linked to people's day-to-day targets. And that's natural for anything in any organization. It will not happen unless you put it on your scorecard, put it on your KPI system. And that's precisely what these companies I just named have done.
Fantastic, brilliant. Thank you very much, Keyvan. Well, I
Thank you
think
very much, Joe.
we're coming to the end of our hour now, so I guess it's time to wrap up.
Yes, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate you taking the time to listen to this. I would be very happy to take any more questions. You've got my email at the end of the presentation. Also, thank you very much, Joe, for being such a good facilitator today, and you know, keeping us on time.
No problem.
So yeah, that's all from me.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Keyvan. Just to let the audience know today that there will be a recording of this webinar available, which I will send to you all in the next couple of days. So I think all that's left to say now is thank you once again on behalf of Keyvan and SA Partners, and everybody have a good day. Thank you.